On a freezing night, Tucker lay motionless in the mud, his wounds bleeding, his eyes on the verge of closing forever. He had given up, until a small, gentle voice echoed through the darkness. A voice he couldn't ignore. But who was this boy? And why? The moment their eyes met, did an unexplainable connection spark between them. What do you think really happened to Tucker? Let's dive into this deeply moving story. If you love heartwarming stories about dogs, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Dog Stories today so you never miss another magical moment like this. And now, get ready for a journey you won't forget. The cold mud seeped through Tucker's soaked fur, clinging to his exhausted body. A light drizzle fell, each droplet tapping softly against his dirt-covered muzzle. His breaths were heavy, every inhale sending a sharp pain through his ribs. One of his back legs was twisted, tangled in barbed wire, with blood from a deep gash slowly seeping into the damp earth beneath him. Tucker had no idea how long he had been lying there. An hour? 2? A whole day? All he knew was that his strength was fading, and waves of exhaustion crashed over him like relentless tides. Instinct told him to get up, to keep running, but his body no longer obeyed his commands. He couldn't stop here. Tucker had been trained to never surrender, to push beyond the limits of pain. But this was different. There were no commands from a handler, no grueling drills to endure. There was only him, a discarded dog, trapped in the depths of the forest, drained from running away from those who had once treated him as a tool rather than a living being. A distant clap of thunder echoed through the night, triggering blurry memories in Tucker's mind. Stark white hallways, blinding fluorescent lights, cold voices discussing him like a research project rather than a teammate. SHPD XR7 test subject, responding better than expected but still unstable. If it doesn't meet the standards, we have to eliminate it. Those words still echoed in his head, even if he didn't fully grasp their meaning. Tucker had escaped. He didn't remember how, just the sight of doors swinging open, alarms blaring, voices shouting, and his legs carrying him forward, running until his muscles gave out, running until he lost control and ended up trapped in this miserable, unforgiving pit. A fresh wave of pain shot through him as he tried to lift his leg, the barbed wire digging even deeper into his flesh. He whimpered, too weak to howl for help. Would anyone find him? Or would he slowly fade away here, swallowed by the mud and the darkness? A cold wind swept through the forest, sending a shiver down Tucker's spine. He tried to open his eyes, but everything blurred, fading into the dim glow of the setting sun. Was this the end? Tucker had endured the most grueling training, once the pride of his unit. But now he was nothing more than an injured dog, alone in the unforgiving wilderness. Then, through the sound of raindrops, a flicker of light appeared in the distance. Soft footsteps, light, careful, but unwavering, drew closer. Tucker let his eyes close, his breathing shallow. But just before the darkness could fully consume him, something unfamiliar yet strangely comforting crept into his mind, a presence, warm and peaceful. Then he heard it. A small voice, not loud, not clear, but filled with emotion. Dylan Charles. Somehow, Tucker knew this boy was different. And somehow he knew this wasn't the end. Sound. It wasn't clear, it wasn't strong, but it slipped through the fog of exhaustion. Dylan Charles. Tucker didn't know why that name surfaced in his mind. He didn't remember any human by that name. But somehow he knew this boy was different. A gentle touch on his head, warmth seeping through his soaked fur, small fingers, delicate yet steady, no trembling, no fear. He wanted to open his eyes, but his body had no strength left. Then, through the soft patter of rain, another voice rang out, a woman's voice, worried yet firm. Dylan, no. Exhaustion pulled Tucker under once more, but just before the darkness swallowed him completely, he felt something shift. Someone had found him. And somehow, Tucker knew. He was no longer alone. Dylan didn't understand how he knew it was there. He just knew he had to follow this feeling. His world was always quiet. He didn't speak, didn't like crowded places, didn't meet people's eyes, but the things others overlooked, he always noticed. Like now, standing in the damp forest, Dylan knew something was waiting for him. He tugged at his mother's hand, pointing forward. Dylan? Rebecca frowned, but he didn't answer. He pulled harder. Mud and damp leaves clung to Dylan's shoes, but he didn't care. He felt Tucker before he saw him, an existence both fragile and strong, like a dying flame he couldn't let fade away. Then he stopped. Behind him, his mother gasped, struggling to keep up. "Dylan, what are you?" But then she saw it too, a large dog covered in mud and wounds lying motionless in the marsh. Rebecca held her breath, her heartbeat quickening. Was it even alive? Instinctively, she took a step back. She had never been fond of dogs, especially big, powerful ones like this. She had read too many stories about dog attacks, about sudden, unpredictable dangers. A wild, injured dog could be dangerous. But Dylan didn't step back. Dylan slowly knelt down, his small hands gently touching Tucker's head. "No, Dylan." Rebecca lunged forward, ready to pull him away. But then she froze. Tucker moved. Barely. Just the faintest response, but it was there. Rebecca stood still, unable to believe what she was seeing. Dylan kept his hands on the dog, soft and careful, as if he were whispering something she couldn't hear. A wave of unease rose in Rebecca's chest. Her son, who never liked to be touched, who never reached out to others, was now stroking a wounded, unfamiliar dog as if they had known each other forever. Tucker let out a faint whimper, not from pain, but as if he were responding. Rebecca stood frozen. She didn't know what to do. As a single mother, every decision Rebecca made had to be cautious. She always thought one step ahead, what was safe for her son, what could be a risk. And this dog, it was clearly a risk. It could be sick, it could be dangerous, it could be dying, and there was nothing she could do to help. But then she looked at Dylan. Her son had never been certain about anything. But today, Dylan had led her here. He had found this dog when no one else could sense it. And now, he sat beside Tucker, unafraid, unwavering. Rebecca took a deep breath. She didn't want to be the reason her son lost this moment. "All right," she whispered. "We'll help him." Dylan looked up, his pale gray eyes shining with a light Rebecca had never seen before. Tucker, though barely conscious, somehow understood. His life had just changed forever. He felt the warmth of Dylan's small hand, a faint energy seeping into his weary body, like a flicker of light cutting through the fog of pain. This boy was different, but the darkness was still closing in. Rebecca knelt down, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe she was about to do this, help a wounded, stray dog. She glanced at Dylan. Her son hadn't taken his eyes off Tucker. His tiny hands moved gently through the mud-soaked fur, as if he could feel the dog's pain. And in that moment, in the dim glow of the fading daylight, Dylan's gray eyes held a rare determination, stronger than she had ever seen before. Rebecca took a deep breath. There was no more time to hesitate. She reached out, feeling Tucker's faint, labored breathing. "All right, we're getting you out of here." But saying it was easier than doing it. The mud was like a swamp, determined to swallow Tucker whole. Rebecca slid her hands under the dog's belly, trying to lift him, but Tucker was too heavy, and the thick, sticky mud clung to him like an unrelenting grip. Every time she pulled, more mud oozed in, sucking at his legs, holding him down as if it refused to let go of its prey. Tucker whimpered in pain as the barbed wire dug deeper into his flesh. Rebecca gritted her teeth and pulled harder. But it was useless. He was too big, too heavy. "I can't do this alone." She looked around, desperately searching for something, anything that could give her more leverage. Dylan remained by Tucker's side, gently whispering soft sounds. They weren't real words, but a soothing melody, like a language only the dog could understand. "And the strangest thing," Tucker responded. Though barely conscious, his tail gave the faintest wag, as if trying to answer the boy. Rebecca yanked off her coat. If she could wrap it around Tucker, she might be able to use it as a makeshift harness. Quickly, she slid the fabric under the dog's belly, securing it tightly. Then she gripped the sleeves firmly in both hands. "Dylan, hold on to the coat, okay? We're gonna pull together." The boy never let go of Tucker, but he nodded. Rebecca tightened her grip, leaned back, and pulled with everything she had. But the mud refused to let go. Tucker whimpered, and Rebecca felt her heart tighten. If she couldn't do this, the dog would die right here. Dylan stared at Tucker, his eyes gleaming with something unexplainable. Then suddenly he opened his mouth. A single word, small but clear. "Up." Rebecca froze. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Dylan had never spoken. Not a single word, not ever. But now, right at this moment, he had just said his very first. And the most incredible thing, Tucker listened. Even though he was exhausted, even though his wounds burned with pain, Tucker stirred, summoning the last bit of strength he had left. He tried to stand. Rebecca didn't waste a second. She pulled harder. One final desperate effort. And this time, the mud let go. Tucker was free. The dog collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. His fur was soaked, matted with mud, his legs still curled up in pain. But he was out. Rebecca trembled, cold sweat running down her spine despite the freezing air. She knelt beside Tucker, her hands still clutching the coat, unable to believe what had just happened. Then she looked at Dylan. The boy didn't care about the mud, didn't notice the light rain. He just sat beside Tucker, his small arms wrapped around the dog. And Tucker accepted the embrace, too weak to respond but not resisting. Rebecca couldn't understand this. Her son had never hugged anyone, but now he was holding a large, filthy, injured dog, like they had belonged together all along. Rebecca stood up, scanning the forest. She had to decide. Leave Tucker behind? Impossible. He wouldn't survive in this condition. Call for rescue? In a small town like Ridgewood, no one would come to save a stray dog lost in the woods. She didn't believe in miracles, but she believed in Dylan. For the first time in his life, her son had spoken a word. For the first time, he held on to something without fear. Rebecca let out a deep breath, then bent down, wrapping her arms around Tucker. He was heavy, his body limp with exhaustion and pain. We're taking him home. Dylan looked up, his eyes shining in a way Rebecca had never seen before. He reached for her hand, then gently placed it on Tucker, almost as if to promise that the dog would be safe. Tucker, too weak to lift his head, nudged Dylan's hand in return. A silent thank you before he drifted into deep sleep. None of them knew it yet, but this moment would change everything. Rebecca's car rolled slowly down the empty road. Inside, Dylan sat pressed against Tucker, one small hand resting gently on the dog's mud-caked fur, as if to make sure he was still there. Rebecca glanced at her son through the rearview mirror. For the first time, she saw Dylan truly focused on something. He wasn't fidgeting with his jacket strings, wasn't flipping through the pages of a book over and over like he usually did. His eyes never left Tucker, completely lost in the dog's presence. And that worried Rebecca. When they finally arrived home, she moved quickly, preparing warm water and grabbing the first aid kit. She pulled out a large towel, spreading it on the floor, then carefully lifted Tucker out of the car. The dog was still barely moving, his slow, shallow breaths the only sign that he was holding on. Dylan, I need you to step back for a moment so I can clean him up, Rebecca said, but Dylan didn't move. The boy remained kneeling beside Tucker, his small hand gently stroking the dog's head. Then, softly, barely more than a whisper, Dylan began murmuring. Not real words, but a strange, distant melody, something unfamiliar and almost otherworldly. Rebecca froze. She had never heard Dylan make this many sounds before. And Tucker reacted instantly. Though his eyes were still hazy with exhaustion, he let out a faint whimper, his tail giving the slightest twitch. A cold shiver ran down Rebecca's spine. After soothing Tucker's wounds with warm water, Rebecca gently dried his soaked fur. But as her hand brushed along his neck, she noticed something strange. A long scar ran beneath the thick fur, stretching from behind his ear all the way down to his shoulder. Rebecca frowned. She had seen injuries from accidents before, but this was different. Perfectly straight, cleanly cut, as if someone had deliberately sliced it open to implant something inside. A shiver ran through her. This dog wasn't just any dog. Tucker stirred slightly, his heavy head resting against Dylan, as if he sensed her scrutinizing him too closely. What have you been through? Rebecca murmured, her fingers gently tracing the scar. The moment she pressed slightly against it, Tucker flinched, then let out a barely audible whimper, a sound almost like an electric hum. Rebecca jerked her hand back, startled. She glanced at Dylan, but the boy showed no fear. His hand remained on Tucker's head, as if he could understand the dog's thoughts. Once Tucker was dry, Rebecca examined the wound on his leg. But as she lifted the thick fur on his shoulder for a closer look, something small and hard scraped against her fingertip. She frowned and carefully pried it loose. A thin metal tag, no bigger than an ID card, had been hidden beneath the fur near the scar. Rebecca's brow furrowed as she held it up to the light. The tag was rectangular, a dull silver color, not like any dog tag she had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, except for a single engraved line, faint from wear but still legible. V17, RK9. Rebecca blinked. What the hell is this? She flipped the tag over, hoping for more information, but the back was completely blank. Her mind raced with questions. With Dylan still sitting beside Tucker, Rebecca grabbed her laptop and typed the strange code into the search bar. She tried everything. V17 military dog. RK9 meaning? Animal identification codes. But there were no relevant results. Most of the articles only discussed K9 unit dogs, but nothing remotely similar to the tag Tucker was wearing. Rebecca gritted her teeth. She had the unsettling feeling that she was touching on something no one wanted to talk about. The strange changes in Dylan. Rebecca shut the laptop and turned back to her son. Dylan was still sitting beside Tucker, his eyes glowing in the dim light. He continued murmuring those soft, indecipherable sounds, his small hand resting gently on the dog's warm fur. Tucker, despite his exhaustion, nudged his head closer to Dylan, as if he understood every sound the boy made. Rebecca swallowed hard. Something wasn't normal. Rebecca stared at the strange metal tag on the table. A wounded stray dog, a boy who had never spoken, and a mysterious code that led to nothing. She shivered. Who was Tucker, really? Rebecca couldn't sleep. Ever since she found the strange code V17RK9, an unsettling feeling had taken hold of her. She had searched everywhere, but there was no trace of it online. As if this code didn't exist. She glanced at Tucker. It still lay beside Dylan, exhausted but not fully closing its eyes. It was alert, as if sensing something beyond human perception. Outside, the storm was drawing near, and no one knew that the real darkness had already arrived in Ridgewood. The next morning, a stranger appeared in town. He didn't look like a tourist. Dressed in a black coat, his posture rigid, his gaze scanning the streets with precision. He was searching for something. Something important. Inside a small cafe on Main Street, he stepped in, drawing immediate attention from the locals. Ridgewood was a quiet town, rarely visited by outsiders, and even more rarely by someone with the air of a soldier. The man unlocked his phone, swiping through a few images before scanning the room. He walked up to the counter, where the cafe owner, Carol, a woman in her 50s with graying hair, was wiping down a table. Placing his phone on the counter, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Have you seen this dog?" Carol glanced at the screen. A German Shepherd. The photo was taken from a professional angle, not like a typical pet picture. It looked like something out of a military file. "No," Carol replied immediately. "I don't think I've seen it." The man tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes studying her reaction. "Are you sure?" His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable undertone of quiet menace. Carol felt a chill creep up her spine, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm sure." The man studied her for a moment, then slid his phone back into his pocket. "Thank you." Then he walked out of the cafe. But he wasn't leaving town. He had found another lead. Rebecca realizes the danger. Rebecca was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast when her phone buzzed. It was Carol. Her voice was tense. "There's a strange man in town. He's looking for a German Shepherd." Rebecca froze. A cold wave ran down her spine. "Did you see the picture?" she asked, her voice dropping lower. "I did, and I think it looks like the dog you brought home." Her heart skipped a beat. "I don't know who he is, but he doesn't seem like someone who takes no for an answer," Carol added. "You should be careful." Rebecca hung up immediately, spinning around to look at Tucker. He was still lying next to Dylan, but his amber eyes were wide open now, alert, as if he sensed something coming. Rebecca took a deep breath. "We have to get out of here. Now." She knelt beside Dylan, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, we're going on a little trip, okay?" Dylan looked up, his gray eyes meeting his mother's. He didn't say anything, didn't react much. But the moment Rebecca reached for Tucker, Dylan clung to the dog tightly, as if he already knew something was wrong. Rebecca swallowed hard. She moved quickly, grabbing a few essentials, jackets, phone, car keys. She pushed open the back door, ready to scoop Dylan up and get Tucker into the car. But the moment she stepped outside, she froze. At the end of the street, a black armored off-road vehicle was parked. It hadn't been there before. Rebecca felt her breath hitch. The vehicle had no Ridgewood plates. A deep, suffocating sense of dread flooded her chest. She spun back around and shut the door immediately. Tucker let out a low growl, his ears twitching. He knew. Rebecca pulled Dylan close, whispering, "I need you to stay completely quiet." Dylan nodded without hesitation. Dylan didn't ask why. He knew. Tucker's ears perked up. His amber eyes locked onto the door. Outside there was a sound. Footsteps. Someone was getting closer. Rebecca's entire body tensed. The man appears. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the house. Rebecca froze. Her breathing grew heavy. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice, deep, cold. "I know you're in there, Rebecca." Her blood ran cold. He knew her name. He knew she had Tucker. And that meant they were running out of time. Rebecca felt a chill crawl down her spine. Outside, the third knock came. Harder, more deliberate. She had to act. Now, she clutched Dylan tightly, pulling him closer to Tucker. "Tucker, let's go," she whispered. The dog let out a low growl, but he understood. He had run before. And now, he would have to run again. Rebecca carefully guided Dylan toward the back door, moving silently, deliberately. Tucker stayed close, his steps careful despite the pain. Rebecca's breath was shallow, her fingers fumbling as she reached into her pocket for the car keys. She didn't look back. She couldn't. They climbed into the car. The door had barely shut when, bang! The front door was kicked open. Rebecca slammed her foot on the gas, no hesitation, no second-guessing. The tires screeched against the pavement as the car shot down the empty road. And then in the rearview mirror, she saw it. The armored off-road vehicle. It was following. Close. Not speeding, not flashing its headlights. Just tracking them with cold precision. Her heart pounded so hard it felt deafening in the silence of Ridgewood's midnight streets. Beside her, Dylan clung to Tucker, his eyes quiet yet unnervingly aware. He knew they were in danger. And Rebecca couldn't let that happen. She swerved sharply onto the narrow road leading to the town's only veterinary clinic. The lights inside were still on. Dr. Mark Bennett, a man in his 50s, had spent 3 decades working with animals. If anyone could help Tucker, it was him. Rebecca slammed the brakes, throwing the car into park. She flung the door open, scooping Dylan out first before rushing back for Tucker. Outside, the wind howled, icy air slicing through the night, creeping into every seam of her coat. Rebecca tried to stay calm as she pounded on the door. It swung open. Dr. Bennett frowned, ready to scold whoever was making a racket at this late hour, but the moment he saw Tucker, covered in mud, blood, and wounds, he froze. "Good Lord, what happened to this dog?" "I'll explain later, but please, can you help us?" Rebecca tried to keep her voice steady, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. Dr. Bennett didn't hesitate. He pushed the door open wider and motioned. "Bring him inside." As Tucker was lifted onto the examination table, his eyes fluttered shut. But he wasn't sleeping. He saw. Fragments of memories crashed into him. Blinding white lights overhead, the hum of machines echoing in a sterile room. Figures in white lab coats, their faces devoid of warmth, wires attached to his head. Pain. He had been there before. Somewhere darker than death itself. Dr. Bennett carefully examined Tucker, his eyes sharp with focus. But as Dr. Bennett ran his hand along Tucker's neck, he suddenly froze. "Wait a second." He gently parted the thick fur, revealing the long scar Rebecca had noticed earlier. "This isn't a normal injury," he murmured, his voice low and serious. "It looks like a surgical implant." Rebecca bit her lip, then reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the small metal tag with the strange code. "I found this under his fur." Dr. Bennett took it, holding it closer to the light. His brows knitted together. "This isn't a standard pet ID tag." Turning it over, he noticed a barely visible slit along the edge. Without a word, he grabbed a pair of surgical tweezers and carefully pried the slit open. A tiny microchip slipped into his palm. The room fell into a heavy silence, so quiet that the wind howling outside the window felt deafening. Dr. Bennett hurriedly inserted the chip into his computer. The screen flickered for a few seconds before a classified file appeared. Rebecca squinted at the title, Project RK9, Termination Report. "Termination?" she whispered. Her grip tightened as she glanced down at Tucker. Dr. Bennett scrolled through the document, his voice tense as he read aloud. "Test subject V17 has demonstrated capabilities far beyond initial projections. Its ability to perceive human emotions and respond to nonverbal cues has reached unprecedented levels. However, due to loss of control during testing, this subject has been deemed a failure and scheduled for termination." Termination date. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Tucker wasn't just any dog. He was created to be something more. And when he didn't meet their standards, they planned to erase him. But he escaped. A chill ran through Rebecca's body. She turned to Dylan. He was still clutching Tucker, as if he could feel the turmoil inside the wounded shepherd. Before she could say anything, the clinic door shook violently. Bang, bang, bang. A deep, familiar voice echoed from the other side. "We know you're in there, Rebecca." Dr. Bennett's eyes flicked between Rebecca and the chip on the screen. "We need to go, now." Rebecca didn't hesitate. She grabbed Dylan, holding him close as Bennett yanked the chip from the computer and stuffed it into his pocket. Below them, Tucker slowly pushed himself up. His amber eyes glowed in the dim light. He knew. He had run before, and now he would have to run again. Rebecca slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded over the gravel road, the car jerking sideways. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a tall figure standing in the road, waiting for them. The man stepped out of the armored vehicle, his movements controlled, his gaze sharp as a blade. He didn't need force. He believed he had already won. "Give me the dog." His polished boots pressed into the damp earth as he strode forward. "Tucker." The way he said the name, low even, wasn't a call. It was a command, as if he were summoning property, not a living being. "Hand him over, and you won't have a problem." Rebecca tightened her grip around Dylan. "No." The man's expression flickered, just for a second, as if he wasn't used to being told no. "You don't understand what's happening here, Rebecca." His voice was slow, measured, almost patient. "That dog doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone. It is the product of a classified program. It doesn't belong in this world." Tucker growled, not out of fear, because it remembered him. It remembered the pain. It remembered how they had treated it, like a machine. A failed experiment meant to be erased. But now it had something to protect. Tucker stepped forward, placing itself between Dylan and the man. The man sighed as if he were growing tired of this. "Rebecca." This time his voice was different, colder. The pretense was gone. "I won't ask again." Rebecca gripped her phone tightly, her hands shaking, not from fear. "You're right," she whispered. "Tucker doesn't belong in this world." She pressed a button on her phone. "Send." The man's eyes widened. "What did you just do?" Rebecca lifted her head, staring straight at him. "The data on Project RK9 has been sent to every major news outlet," she said slowly. "The New York Times, the Washington Post, and plenty of others." The man froze. For the first time, his mask slipped. Anger flickered behind his cold stare. "You just made a huge mistake." "No," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than ever. "The only mistake was thinking I'd let you keep experimenting on innocent lives." Tucker tensed, muscles coiled, ready to strike at any moment. Dylan, who had been silent this entire time, suddenly stepped forward. He placed his small hand on Tucker's head, and then he looked straight at the man. "Enough." One word, but it carried weight. The man's face paled. He didn't understand why, but something in that child's voice made him freeze. Tucker wasn't a failed experiment. Tucker had bonded with a human in a way no one had ever anticipated. And in this moment, the man realized their experiment had succeeded, but not in the way they had intended. In the distance, the wail of police sirens echoed through the night. Rebecca didn't blink. "Your program is over," she said. "Tucker belongs to no one but himself now." The man clenched his fists, then slowly let them drop. He had lost, and he knew it. The man took a step back, saying nothing, then turned and climbed into his vehicle. The armored truck growled to life, then roared into the night, disappearing from Ridgewood forever. For the first time, Tucker relaxed. Rebecca let out a slow breath as if a massive weight had finally lifted from her chest. Dylan looked at Tucker, then at his mother, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. 1 month later, spring had returned to Ridgewood. In a vast green meadow just outside town, Dylan ran freely through the wildflowers, his laughter carried by the breeze. Beside him, Tucker raced along, his tail wagging, eyes shining with pure joy. Dylan laughed, a bright, full sound Rebecca had never heard before. "Come on, Tucker," he called out. A full sentence. No more whispers, no more single words. He had found his voice, and the dog they once saved had saved him in a way no one could have ever imagined. Rebecca sat on a wooden bench, quietly watching the scene unfold before her, a deep sense of peace settling in her chest. Their journey had ended. The story of Tucker and Dylan is more than just a tense escape. It's a powerful testament to the strength of connection. A dog once deemed a failure found his true family, And a boy who once lived in his own world discovered his voice through the most loyal friend he could ever have. Do you think Tucker remembers his past? In his dreams, does he see the life he once had? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Dog Stories today. Your support helps us bring even more incredible stories to life, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll continue to share inspiring stories of friendship, loyalty, and unforgettable moments between humans and dogs. You won't want to miss them.